In today's mission, I'm going to show you a way to make your Tyranid armor look more like the rough, scratched chitin that we see in Space Marine 2. And to do that, you'll need to harness the destructive power of glue. This is Cursed Crusader Arts. Glue can be used for all kinds of things, aside from putting your miniatures together, and today we're going to specifically look at plastic glue or polystyrene cement. This melts down other plastics and fuses them together before drying, and for our purposes today, we're going to be using extra thin poly cement. What we're doing is softening the surface layers of plastic, which will allow us to apply more detail. To do this, I first scrub over the surface with a wire brush. This will tear up the surface of the plastic and create these small scratches and balls of plastic which will rest on top of the surface and around the edges, but resist the urge to remove them because they'll become very important later on in the process. Next, you want a hard, pointed tool and begin scraping long lines along the chitin. By their nature, many Tyranids use burrowing tactics, and I would imagine that their armor is going to be pretty torn up by the rocks, metal, and all other manner of horrible materials in the ground. Next, apply some more glue over the damage that you've already created. This is to soften the damage to make it blend back into the surface of the miniature, and those little balls and lumps of plastic are going to melt back into the armor, adding these small lumps to the chitin alongside the grooves that you've already created with the poking tool. To make these details more prominent, repeat the process. Apply a layer of glue, scratch it back down with the pokey tool, and then add one more layer to soften those edges. You can do this as many times as you like, but always add that extra layer of glue at the end. But I tend to find that 2 rounds of this is more than enough for these smaller miniatures. If you're like me, you're part of the Drill Your Barrels club, and the termagants are no different, even if their shape is. I start with my pokey tool, using it to push a divot into the surface of the barrel. This is to create a pilot hole for my drill. Drill down about ½ centimeter, and then take a sharp hobby knife to begin carving away at the barrel, widening the hole. Be gentle with it or you might accidentally break off the delicate tip of your hobby knife, but what we're looking for is to replicate the barrels that we see on the larger Tyranid organisms, like the biovore, which fires living spore mines like some giant sentient mortar. Looking down the barrel, you'll see that it's quite rough, and so we can use the glue to soften the edges and make it smooth again, ready for painting. You can see on these Hormagaunts that I've done the same thing with their scything talons, imagining that these particular scrapes are coming from burrowing and carving through metal and ceramides. And this is going to help separate them from other armies that forge their weapons and armor. Instead of having pristine and smooth gear, instead you've got something much more organic and rugged, perfect for something that leans towards a more realistic or grimdark aesthetic. Now if you like this idea, give it a shot and let me know how you got on with it. But before you go, I've got a couple of side quests for you. Some of these older push-fit miniatures have a lot of gaps around the sides, particularly underneath the body and around the carapace. To repair this, I'm going to use some polyester filler, which uses a similar process to the glue to bond things together, only this is much thicker, using the filler to seal up any gaps that may be found. I guide this into place with some tools and clean up the excess as best as I can. Once this is cured overnight, I can clean this up even further, whether it's through scraping, filing, or sanding to get a smooth and seamless bond. This is great for old miniatures that have already been put together and need that little bit of extra help. But what if I told you that you could prevent these gaps from forming on your plastic miniatures in the first place? Well, to do that, we need some sprue goo. This is a material that has become quite well known throughout hobbying circles, and it's a handcrafted tool. This is done by melting down spare sprues in a bottle of poly cement or acetone until it becomes something that looks a little bit like muck. This can be used while putting some aspects of your miniatures together, and I found it's especially useful for ball joints, like the Tyranid arms. This second side quest is completed by putting some sprue goo into the socket of the miniature, and if yours, like mine, is quite thick, you can thin it out a little bit around the edges with some more poly cement. With the socket prepared, place the ball joint section into the socket and you'll see the sprue goo ooze out of the sides. Don't worry about this is exactly what we want. Smooth this out with the brush applicator of your poly cement. Once you've smoothed everything out, hold the limb into the position that you want until it's dried enough for it to support itself. To fully dry and cure, it's going to take a long time, so I would recommend leaving it overnight before moving on to any painting stages. But once it is dry, you can see that the ball joints actually look like it's part of the body, rather than simply another part added to the body. This will end up looking quite glossy, but it can be primed and painted over like usual. With your limbs in place, you can also use sprue goo to add the additional armor plates to your miniatures in a way that makes them look seamless. Although these are being used like shoulder pads, we need to remember that Tyranids don't add the armor like a Space Marine does. It's grown into place. So apply the sprue goo to the shoulders the same way as you did the ball joints, and then add the extra armor on top for a seamless result. From here, you can flip the model upside down and apply more sprue goo as and where you need to, thinning it out with the pure extra thin poly cement until you have the result that you're looking for. And with all these skills put together, you've been able to harness the destructive power of glue in order to repair and enhance your miniatures so that they can be the best that you can make. So if you enjoyed this, subscribe for more, and whatever you do, make things, have fun, and I'll see you next time on Cursed Crusader Arts.